The cold, serrated edge of the handcuffs beat into my wrists with a final, sickening click, and my face was shoved hard against the blistering charcoal hood of my 1967 Mustang. Behind me, the world was a cacophony of terror. The high-pitched, jagged screams of my 7-year-old son, Leo, and the heavy, rhythmic thud of a police officer's boots on my own gravel driveway. But it wasn't just any officer. It was Officer Miller, the neighbor who lived 3 houses down, the man who had spent the last 6 months watching me from behind his Venetian blinds with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "Keep your mouth shut, Marcus," Miller hissed into my ear, his breath smelling of stale coffee and malice as he pressed his knee into the small of my back. "I told you people this neighborhood wasn't for you, and now I finally have the proof I need to put you where you belong." The sun was blinding, reflecting off the chrome of the car I had spent 3 years meticulously restoring, a car that was now being treated like a piece of stolen evidence. Just 20 minutes ago, I had been standing in my kitchen, the air thick with the sweet domestic smell of blueberry pancakes and the low hum of the morning news. I had been wearing my favorite faded hoodie, laughing as Leo tried to flip a pancake and ended up landing it on the floor. My wife, Sarah, was leaning against the counter, her hair messy from sleep, her eyes sparkling with that quiet, effortless warmth that always made me feel like the luckiest man alive. We had worked so hard for this. The house with the wraparound porch, the manicured lawn in Oak Creek, the sense of safety that comes with a gold standard suburban zip code. I am a man of routines. I like the predictable weight of a wrench in my hand and the way the engine of the Mustang purrs when I finally get the timing right. To our neighbors, I was Marcus Thorne, the guy who worked somewhere in logistics in the city, the guy who kept his lawn a little too perfect and his voice a little too low. I was the quiet one. I was the one who didn't cause trouble. But underneath that carefully constructed veneer of suburban normalcy, I carried secrets that weighed more than the Mustang's engine block. I was a senior detective with the Organized Crime Division, currently 8 months deep into an undercover operation that was supposed to dismantle the largest car theft ring in the tri-state area. My life depended on being invisible. My family's safety depended on no one knowing that the logistics guy was actually the man holding the keys to a dozen federal indictments. Officer Miller had been a thorn in my side from the day the moving truck arrived. While the other neighbors brought over bundt cakes and wine, Miller had stood on the sidewalk, his arms crossed over his uniform, eyes scanning my moving boxes as if they contained contraband. He was a man who wore his authority like a suit of armor, even when he was off duty. He was the self-appointed guardian of Oak Creek's purity, a man who believed that a certain level of income, or perhaps a certain skin tone, didn't belong in a neighborhood where the streetlights always worked. "Nice car," he'd said to me a few months back, stopping his patrol cruiser at the end of my driveway while I was polishing the Mustang's fenders. He didn't get out. He just rolled down the window, his mirrored aviators reflecting my own tired face back at me. "Must cost a lot of money to keep a classic like that running. A lot of money for a guy in, what did you say? Logistics?" "Hard work and long hours, officer," I had replied, keeping my voice level, though my pulse had quickened. I knew the type. I had spent my career putting guys like him in the ground, men who used a badge to bridge the gap between their own mediocrity and their desire for power. "I'm sure," Miller had smirked, his hand resting conspicuously on his service weapon. "Just make sure you have all your paperwork in order. We've had a lot of reports of suspicious activity lately. Wouldn't want there to be any misunderstandings." I had ignored the bait. In my line of work,
You learn to swallow your pride until it tastes like ash. I had a wife who loved this house, and a son who finally had a backyard big enough to play catch in. I wasn't going to let a small-minded beat cop with a chip on his shoulder ruin the peace I had fought so hard to provide for them. I told Sarah it was nothing. I told her he was just an old-school cop who took his job too seriously. But every time I saw his cruiser linger at the corner of our street, every time I caught him staring at our house through his binoculars from his darkened living room, I knew the clock was ticking. That Saturday morning, the peace didn't just break, it shattered. I had stepped out to the driveway to grab the morning paper, still in my slippers, when 3 police cruisers roared onto my quiet cul-de-sac, tires screaming against the asphalt.
They didn't just pull up, they boxed me in. Before I could even process the flashing blue and red lights, Miller was out of his car, his gun drawn and leveled at my chest. "Get on the ground, now, hands behind your head," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the houses of my startled neighbors, who were already peering out of their windows. "Miller? What is this? What's going on?" I shouted, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked toward the front door and saw Sarah holding Leo back, her face a mask of pure, paralyzing horror. "We got a tip, Thorne," Miller sneered as he slammed me down onto the gravel, the sharp stones digging into my knees. "A stolen vehicle matching this exact VIN was reported missing from a high-end collection in the city last night. And look at that, here it is, sitting in the driveway of a man who can't explain where his money comes from." He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't want one. He grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back with a force that made me gasp, the pain radiating up to my shoulder. He wanted the theater. He wanted the neighborhood to see the logistics guy being dragged away in chains. He wanted to prove he was right about me all along. "Dad, stop! Leave him alone!" Leo's voice was a jagged blade cutting through the morning air. Sarah was screaming now too, trying to push past another officer who had intercepted her at the porch steps. "Check the registration, Miller," I yelled, my face pressed into the hot metal of the Mustang. "It's in the glove box. It's in my name. Look at the title." "Oh, we'll look at everything," Miller whispered, his voice dropping to a low, chilling vibration as he leaned down, his face inches from mine. "We'll look at your bank accounts, your house, and that pretty little wife of yours. I've been waiting for this day, Marcus. I knew you were a fraud the second you stepped onto my street. You don't belong here. You never did." As he hauled me up, the world seemed to slow down. I saw the neighbors, the Millers from across the street, the Hendersons, the elderly Mrs. Gable, all standing on their lawns, watching the criminal being apprehended. I felt the heat of the sun, the stinging sweat in my eyes, and the crushing weight of the irony. I was a man who spent his nights hunting wolves, and here I was, being torn apart by a stray dog in my own front yard. But as Miller shoved me toward the back of the cruiser, a cold, hard clarity began to settle over me. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know about the badge hidden in the safe in my office, or the direct line I had to the commissioner. He thought he was winning. He thought he had finally purged his neighborhood of the intruder. He had no idea he had just started a war he was never equipped to fight. The signs had been there for weeks, buzzing like a hornet against a window pane, ignored until the sting finally came. It started with my mother-in-law, Evelyn. She was a woman who smelled of expensive lilies and old money condescension, a woman who had never quite forgiven her daughter Sarah for marrying a man whose lineage didn't trace back to a Mayflower passenger. Evelyn lived in a sprawling estate 3 towns over. But lately,
She had been a permanent fixture in our living room, her eyes tracking me with the cold, analytical precision of a predator. "It's just such a flashy car, Marcus," she had remarked 2 weeks ago, her voice dripping with artificial concern as she watched me pull the Mustang into the garage. "In a neighborhood like this, people talk. They wonder how a man with such a mysterious job can afford a toy that costs more than some people's college tuition." I had laughed it off then, sipping my coffee. "It's a hobby, Evelyn. I restored it myself." "Restored it with what? Magic?" she snapped, her rings clinking against her china cup. Sarah was sitting right there, her eyes fixed on her lap, her fingers nervously twisting her wedding band. She didn't say a word. She didn't defend the late nights I'd spent in the garage, or the way I'd saved every penny from my logistics bonuses. She just sat there, a statue of silent complicity. That was the first red flag, the silence. Sarah had always been my fiercest advocate, but lately she had become a ghost in our own home. She would startle when I entered a room, quickly flipping her phone face down. When I asked her what was wrong, she'd murmur something about stress at the gallery and retreat into the bathroom for an hour. I told myself it was the pressure of the new house, the weight of being the perfect couple in Oak Creek. I was an undercover detective. I was trained to spot lies. Yet I was blinded by the very walls I had built to protect my family. Then there was the night I found Miller in my backyard. It was nearly midnight, and I had stepped out for a breath of air. I saw a shadow by the fence, near the gate that led to the alley.
It was Miller in plain clothes, talking in low, urgent tones to someone on the other side. When he saw me, he didn't look startled. He looked smug. "Just checking the perimeter, neighbor," Miller had said, his voice a low drawl. "Lots of unauthorized movement lately. Wouldn't want any trash blowing into the wrong yards." "It's midnight, Miller. Get off my property," I told him, my hand instinctively twitching toward the spot where my holster usually sat. "Sure thing, Marcus. Just remember, eyes are everywhere." When I went back inside, Sarah was standing by the window, her face pale in the moonlight. "What did he want?" she whispered. "He's just being a prick, Sarah. Don't worry about it." Maybe we should just sell the car," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe Evelyn is right. It draws too much attention." I stared at her, the first cold lick of suspicion blooming in my chest. "Since when do you care what your mother thinks about my car? You helped me pick out the leather for the seats." She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, her silence louder than any shout. The point of no return, the moment the floor dropped out from under my life, happened exactly 10 minutes before the police cruisers screamed into the driveway. I was looking for my car keys, which I'd misplaced during the morning's pancake chaos. I checked the bowl by the door, the kitchen counter, and finally, Sarah's handbag, which she'd left open on the sideboard. Digging through the clutter of receipts and lipsticks, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic. It wasn't my keys. It was a secondary phone, a cheap prepaid burner I'd never seen before. My blood turned to ice. In my line of work, burners only meant one thing: trouble. I turned it on, my fingers trembling. There was only one contact in the phone, labeled simply as M. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened the message thread. "He's going out to the car at 9 a.m. The VIN plate is swapped. It's ready." The last outgoing message read, sent from Sarah's phone at 8:45 a.m. The reply from M sent a wave of nausea rolling through me that made my vision blur. "Good. My guys are around the corner. Make sure the kid is inside. I'll handle the rest. He won't be coming back to that house, Sarah. You're free." M wasn't just anyone. M was Miller. I stood there, the burner phone heavy in my palm, feeling the world shatter into a million jagged pieces. My wife, the woman I had spent 10 years building a life with, the mother of my son, hadn't just been silent. She had been the architect. She had worked with the racist cop next door to frame me, to strip me of my dignity, and to steal my life. I looked up and saw Sarah standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She saw the burner phone in my hand. Her face didn't crumble. She didn't cry. She just went cold, her eyes turning into flint. "Marcus," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Give me the phone." "You did this?" I whispered, the words tasting like poison. "With Miller? You knew what he is. You knew what he'd do to me." "He's a decorated officer," she said, stepping toward me, her chin tilted up in a way that mimicked her mother perfectly. "And you're just a man with too many secrets. My mother was right. You were never one of us. You were a project that failed." "I'm an undercover detective, Sarah. I'm the one who protects people," I roared, the anger finally breaking through the shock. "Not anymore," she said calmly. At that exact moment, the first siren wailed in the distance. Sarah didn't flinch. She simply turned her back on me and walked toward the front door to greet the man who was coming to destroy me. The physical reaction was violent. My stomach cramped, a sharp, stabbing pain that made me double over. My ears began to ring, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the approaching sirens. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead, and for a second, I thought I might actually lose consciousness. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was a physical assault. My lungs felt like they were filling with sand, every breath a labored, agonizing struggle. I looked at the burner phone one last time before shoving it into my pocket. I had been so worried about the wolves in the city, the cartels and the thieves I hunted every day. I never realized I was sleeping in a den of vipers. As the first police cruiser jumped the curb and Miller stepped out with his gun drawn, I didn't feel fear. I felt a white-hot, crystalline rage. They thought they were arresting a logistics guy with a stolen car. They thought they were clearing the neighborhood of an undesirable. They had no idea that they hadn't just arrested a man. They had ignited a fuse. And as Miller's boots thudded onto my gravel, I made a silent vow. I would burn their world to the ground before I let them take mine. Miller didn't just lead me to the patrol car, he paraded me. He kept his hand clamped on the back of my neck, forcing my head down in a gesture of forced submission, ensuring every neighbor on the block saw the criminal finally unmasked. He stopped by the driver's side of the Mustang, tapping the hood with his metal flashlight. The hollow clink, clink sounded like a death knell. "You know, Marcus, I really have to hand it to you," Miller said, loud enough for the Hendersons to hear from their porch. "Most thieves have the sense to stash the loot in a garage, but you were so arrogant, you thought you could just park it in the sun for everyone to see, like you actually belonged here." "The car is legal, Miller," I gritted out, my voice raspy from the gravel dust I'd inhaled. "Check the internal registry, not the public database, the restricted one. You're making the biggest mistake of your life." Miller laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "I'm not making a mistake. I'm making a statement. This neighborhood is a garden, and I'm the one who pulls the weeds. By the time your lawyer gets to the station, this car will be stripped, the VIN will be confirmed as a match for a stolen vehicle in Jersey, and you'll be sitting in a cell with the kind of people you think you're better than." My heart hammered a frantic rhythm. He was planning to swap the VIN plates himself, or he already had. He was going to destroy the evidence of my ownership before I could even get to a phone. "Sarah!" I shouted, twisting my head to find her. She was standing at the edge of the driveway, her arms wrapped tightly around Leo. My son was sobbing, his small hands clutching her shirt, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Miller. "Sarah, tell them how long I've had that car. Tell them I'm a cop." The silence that followed was more agonizing than the handcuffs. Sarah didn't move. She didn't blink.
She looked at me with a detached, clinical curiosity, as if I were a specimen under a microscope. "I don't know who you are anymore, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and carrying through the still morning air. "The man I married didn't have hidden bank accounts. He didn't have burner phones and logistics jobs that required him to disappear for 3 days at a time. I found the documents, Marcus. I found the truth." "What documents?" I gasped. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" She stepped forward, reaching into the pocket of her robe. She pulled out a small manila folder and handed it to Miller. "I found these in the back of his closet this morning. I was going to call you, Officer Miller, but you were already here. I think these are the titles to the other cars he's restoring." Miller opened the folder with a flourish, pulling out a stack of papers. Even from 5 feet away, I could see the official-looking seals. They were forgeries, meticulous, high-quality forgeries of stolen vehicle titles from my own department's evidence locker. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute. This was an assassination. "Well, well," Miller sneered, waving the papers in my face. "Looks like we have a regular chop shop kingpin living in Oak Creek. Sarah, you're a brave woman. It couldn't have been easy living with a man like this." "I just want him out of my house," she said, her voice flat. "I want my son to be safe." "Sarah, look at me!" I yelled, trying to lunge toward her, but the second officer grabbed my shoulder, wrenching it back. "This is a setup. How much is he paying you? Or is it your mother? Is this Evelyn's idea?" As if summoned by the mention of her name, a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Evelyn stepped out, dressed as if she were going to a funeral. Black silk suit, pearls, and a face that looked like it had been carved from ice. She walked straight to Sarah, placing a protective arm around her. "It's over, Marcus," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with a fake, theatrical tremor. "We know everything. We know about the life insurance policy you took out in Sarah's name last month. The one with the accidental death rider? Did you think my daughter wouldn't notice? Did you think I wouldn't protect her?" A life insurance policy? I hadn't signed any such thing. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. This wasn't just about the car or the neighborhood. They were framing me for a planned murder for hire to ensure I'd never get out of prison, all while Sarah and her mother liquidated my assets and took my son. "You're lying," I whispered, the weight of the betrayal finally crushing the air from my lungs. "You're framing me for a crime I didn't even commit yet." "Save it for the judge," Miller said, finally shoving me into the back of the cruiser. The interior smelled of old sweat and bleach. Through the scratched plexiglass, I watched as Miller leaned in and whispered something to Sarah.
She nodded, a small, subtle movement, and then she did something that broke what was left of my heart. She smiled. It was a tiny, triumphant curve of the lips, visible only to me. In that moment, I saw the woman I had loved for a decade vanish, replaced by a stranger who had been counting the days until my destruction.
"Mommy, where are they taking Dad?" Leo's voice was a frantic wail as they started to lead him toward Evelyn's car. "Away, Leo," Sarah said, not looking back at the police car. "He has to go away for a long time. But don't worry. Grandma and I are going to take care of everything now." Miller climbed into the driver's seat, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You know what the best part is, Marcus? By the time I'm done with the paperwork, your undercover status is going to look like just another layer of the scam. A rogue cop story. The media loves those. You're not just going to jail. You're going to be the most hated man in this city." He threw the car into gear and began to pull away. I sat there, my wrists bleeding where the metal had rubbed the skin raw, watching my house, the house I had bled for, get smaller in the distance. I saw my son being buckled into Evelyn's car. I saw my wife standing on the lawn, chatting calmly with the other neighbors as if she had just finished a pleasant garden party. My mind was a chaotic storm of grief and shock. But beneath it all, a cold, hard ember of my training began to glow. Miller was arrogant. Arrogance leads to mistakes. He thought he had neutralized me. He thought Sarah had played her part perfectly. But Miller had forgotten one very important detail about undercover work. You never, ever put all your eggs in one basket. He didn't know about the third phone. The one sewn into the lining of my favorite hoodie. The hoodie I was currently wearing. "Hey, Miller," I said, my voice suddenly calm, almost conversational. "Shut up, Thorne," he barked, eyes on the road. "You should have searched me better," I whispered, leaning my head back against the seat. "Because in about 30 seconds, every federal agent within 50 miles is going to get a GPS ping and a live audio feed of this conversation. And I think they're really going to be interested in that part about you stripping the Mustang." Miller's eyes widened in the rearview mirror, his face paling as he realized I wasn't pleading anymore. The hunter had just realized he was sitting in the cage with the tiger. The click of the hidden activation button in my hoodie lining was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just a signal. It was the sound of my old life, the life of Marcus Thorne, the polite neighbor, dying, and Detective Marcus Thorne, the man who hunted monsters, coming back to life. The rage that had been a roiling hot mess in my gut suddenly calcified into a sheet of black ice. My breathing slowed. My pulse, which had been frantic, settled into a heavy, rhythmic thud. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the architect of their ending. "Pull over, Miller," I said, my voice dropping 2 octaves into a tone of quiet command that usually made street-level thugs buckle. "What did you say to me?" Miller barked, glancing back, his hand moving toward his holster. "I said pull over. Right now. Because in approximately 15 seconds, 4 black Suburbans are going to box you in. And if you have your hand on that weapon when they do, they will not hesitate to put a bullet in your head. I am a senior detective with the OCD, badge number 7742. This transport is being recorded, tracked, and live-streamed to a federal server. Every word you said about stripping that Mustang, it's already been transcribed by a court reporter." Miller's face went from a triumphant red to a sickly mottled gray. He looked at the dash, then at the rearview mirror. Behind us, the quiet suburban street was suddenly flooded with the roar of high-performance engines. 4 unmarked SUVs, blacker than a moonless night, tore around the corner, sirens silent, but grille lights flashing a frantic strobe-like blue and red. "You're lying," Miller hissed, but his voice lacked conviction. He tried to speed up, but the Suburbans were already flanking him. One of them pulled in front, forcing him to slam on the brakes. "I don't lie, Miller," I said, leaning forward as far as the handcuffs would allow. "I just keep secrets. And you're about to learn that my secrets have teeth." The takedown was a blur of precision. My team, men I had worked with for years, didn't play around. They swarmed the cruiser, weapons drawn. Miller was dragged out of the driver's seat and slammed onto the pavement with the same brutality he had shown me. I watched through the window as my partner, Detective Vance, stepped up to Miller's face. "You touched a senior detective, Miller," Vance growled, his voice like grinding stones. "You tampered with an active federal investigation. You're not just a bad cop. You're a ghost."
You just haven't realized you're dead yet. Vance opened the back door and used his key to unlock my cuffs. I stepped out of the cruiser, rubbing my raw wrists, the morning sun finally feeling warm instead of burning. I looked down at Miller, who was now weeping into the asphalt, his guardian of the neighborhood persona shattered like cheap glass. "The Mustang," I said to Vance. "He swapped the VIN. He's got a folder of forgeries Sarah gave him." "We've got it all, Marcus," Vance said, handing me a heavy black tactical jacket. "The house has been under surveillance since the day you went deep. We have the recordings of your wife and that old bat Evelyn planning this with Miller in the backyard. They thought they were being clever using burners. They didn't realize we had a parabolic mic on the neighbor's chimney." The transformation was complete. I was back. And now I had a house to visit. I drove the lead Suburban myself, the Mustang following behind on a flatbed, a symbol of my reclaimed life. When we pulled back onto my street, the neighbors were still out, but the mood had shifted. The sight of me in a tactical vest flanked by a dozen federal agents turned their curiosity into palpable fear. I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching on the same gravel where I had been humiliated an hour ago. Sarah and Evelyn were on the porch, sipping iced tea, looking like two queens who had just secured their throne. When they saw me, Sarah's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the wood. Evelyn stood up, her face twisting into a mask of indignation.
"Marcus, what is this? Officer Miller said—"
"Officer Miller is currently being processed for felony evidence tampering and conspiracy to commit a capital crime," I said, stopping at the base of the steps. I didn't yell. I didn't have to. "And as for you, Sarah, you should have checked the deed to this house more carefully."
"This is my house!"
she screamed, her voice hitting a shrill, desperate note.
"My mother paid the down payment. You're a criminal. I have the papers."
"No, Sarah," I said, pulling a document from Vance's hand. "Your mother gifted that money to us, and I used my logistics bonuses, which were actually hazard pay from the Department of Justice, to buy out her interest 6 months ago. This house is in my name, and my name alone. And since you've just been recorded conspiring to frame a federal officer, your interest in my life is officially terminated." I looked at Evelyn, the woman who had tried to erase me. "The life insurance policy you forged? That's wire fraud and attempted murder for hire. The FBI is at your estate right now, Evelyn. I hear the feds are very thorough when it comes to seizing assets." Evelyn's knees finally gave out, and she sank into a wicker chair, her pearls shaking against her neck. Sarah looked at me, her eyes darting around, looking for a way out, a lie to tell, a tear to shed. She tried to step toward me, her face softening into that fake manipulative warmth.
"Marcus, honey, we were just scared. My mother pressured me. She said you were in trouble and—"
"Don't," I said, the word cutting through her bullshit like a scalpel. "The moment you smiled when they took me away was the moment you became a stranger to me. You didn't just betray me, Sarah. You betrayed Leo. You tried to tell him his father was a monster so you could have a bigger bank account."
"You can't take him from me,"
she wailed. "I don't have to," I said. "The state will. While you're awaiting trial for conspiracy, Leo will be with my sister. And I will make sure he never has to hear your voice again until he's old enough to understand why his mother is a felon. The legal fallout was a landslide. Miller took a plea deal, turning on Sarah and Evelyn to save himself from a 20-year sentence. He's currently serving 12. Evelyn's assets were frozen and eventually seized to pay for the mounting legal fees and fines. She's living in a state-assisted care facility now, stripped of the prestige she valued more than her own soul. Sarah is serving 8 years for conspiracy and fraud. 6 months later, the air in Oak Creek felt different. The gold standard neighborhood didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a home. I was sitting on the wraparound porch, the smell of freshly cut grass filling the air. The Mustang was parked in the driveway, its chrome gleaming, its engine perfectly tuned. Leo was in the yard, throwing a ball for the dog we'd finally gotten. He was laughing, a real deep-bellied sound that hadn't been there for a long time. I sipped my coffee, the same quiet routine I had once loved. But this time, there were no secrets, no vipers in the grass. I realized then that betrayal is a lot like a forest fire. It burns everything you thought was permanent, leaving nothing but ash and bone. But ash is the richest soil there is. I looked out at the street where Miller's house sat empty, a for sale sign rotting in the lawn.
I wasn't the man I was before, and I was glad. I was stronger, colder when I needed to be, and infinitely more grateful for the truth. Because the thing about people who try to bury you is that they always forget one thing. You can't bury a man who knows how to dig his way out. And once he's out, he's never going back into the dark.